I'd just like to thank Mike Hurshman for the show, for the talking stuff here. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks. It's going to be kind of fun. I just realized I have notes, but I had cataract surgery and I don't have my new glasses. My old glasses don't work at this distance, so I may just have to wing it and see how it goes. Thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate this very much. And there are a number of people I need to thank before we get too far into this. Garrett Day, of course, and for hosting the show. He became a believer right off the bat. I remember the day I walked in and showed him some of Karl's work, and the response was immediate. He really connected with it. And I've found that people usually are not ambivalent when it comes to Karl's work. They either look at it and kind of don't get it and maybe don't want to, or they look at it and they are hooked and love it. And I'm in that latter category, and many of you are too, from what I've gathered tonight. I want to thank Kitty Nicholason, Karl's ex-wife. This show would not have happened without Kitty. Neither would the book. She did the layout for the book. She's a graphic designer. And I was pretty pathetic. I had no idea I knew how to write it, but I didn't know what to do with it after that. And she insisted on bailing me out, and I'm forever thankful for Kitty's help on this. Chris Travis, where's Chris? My British friend who from the very beginning wanted to be part of this. Immediately. Half the collection is now in England, as well as half the books are going to England. From the very beginning, he wanted to help out with this, and I'm indebted. Diana Reeder, where's Diana? My framer. She did the work on most of these, and with what I handed her, that was not an easy task. So thank you very much. If you need a good framer, Diana Reeder from Desert Canyon Framing. She even does house calls. Very nice. Dan Young, my artist friend, who, again, from the very beginning, Dan used to be an illustrator. And when he saw the collection, he basically verified the instinct that I had, but he did it from a professional standpoint, from the standpoint of real experience, that this is special. This is very, very special. Alex Hates doing the video, very thankful that he's here, so we have a record, which I may have him delete depending on how things go tonight. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Much, much appreciated. Before I get too deep into this, I think there's something that's extremely important. To understand Karl's art, you need some context. If you don't know anything about Karl and you look at the art, you may be intrigued, but there's an awful lot you're not going to understand. There's no way around that. So hopefully I can fill in some of those gaps tonight in a brief talk. I can't go into too much detail. I don't want you lapsing into a coma. But there is context that I think will help you to appreciate the art beyond just a quick glance and go, well, that's kind of cool, but I don't know what it's about. Hopefully I can help you with some of that. I consider Karl a true outsider, and there really is a definition for an outsider artist. I have to back up to World War I. There was something called brute art that was coined by Jean Dubuffet, a French artist. Back around 1913, 1914, a psychiatrist that ran a mental institution thought that art might be good therapy for a lot of the people that had really never been outside of the institution. A lot of them were basically locked up as kids, had very little contact with the outside world. This psychiatrist gave them art supplies and was totally blown away by what came out of it. Dubuffet, the great French expressionist painter, saw the work about 10 years later and started collecting it. And they coined the term art brut, B-R-U-T, French for raw art, meaning these people were all untrained, no academic background whatsoever. They were just purely intuitive and creative. That, over the next 30 or 40 years, morphed into what we call outsider art. The key principles, they had to be untrained or self-taught. Doesn't mean unskilled. It's not folk art. It's way beyond folk art, but they're not academically trained. And I read one definition that I need to read to you because to me it sums it up. And it also kind of applies to Karl. The outsider, I have to get the right distance or I can't see it. The outsider artist deals incessantly with a war in the mind. A war in the mind. Always navigating emotional conflict in order to create outward paths to find inner peace. I read that and I went, well, that's the Karl I knew. Absolutely the Karl I knew. He had a war in his mind. The way I describe it, imagine a computer that has 10 or 12 open files that you can't close, and they just start spinning around, creating chaos. I think that was something that occasionally, more than occasionally, happened to Karl. He had so much going on in his head, and he couldn't really control it. Like 10 open files, and you just can't minimize them. His way of dealing with it was what you're looking at. This is what Karl did to exercise everything that was in his mind that he couldn't control. And I knew Karl, but I also, in looking at his sketchbooks, he made notes. Some of his sketchbooks were in effect journals, and he would comment on what was going on in his head. And things like, if I don't paint, I'm gonna die. That's a quote. And that was never intended for anyone to see. I may be the only person that actually has ever seen that. And it's because I've gone through his sketchbooks that he intended as just private outlets for whatever was going on in his head. I tend to think that he crossed the boundary into being a savant. I'm not a psychoanalyst, although I have to tell you this. I have a friend who is a very experienced psychoanalyst from New York. She has a copy of the book. She never knew Karl. She spent a week poring through the book. She examined every one of the 340 photographs and called me, excuse me, and said, we need to talk. She said, I didn't know the man. I can't give a diagnosis. It'd be unethical because I never examined him. But here's my take. And it pretty much ratified my experience with Karl over 25 or 30 years. Definite inner demons, possibly somewhere on the autism scale, Asperger's syndrome, maybe. And if you know anything about that, people that have that kind of characteristic, they're usually extremely intelligent, not always comfortable in social situations, and remarkably gifted in one of three areas. It's either music, mathematics, or art. And man, that fit Karl to a T. He was all about art and not much else. He had a photographic memory. These things he did without references for the most part. It was stuff that was in his head. And you look at the complexity of these drawings. Imagine someone that has had 5 beers and half a bottle of tequila. And those are his words, that's what he told me. He'd wake up in the morning at his drawing table and there'd be 3, 4, 5 drawings of that kind of complexity without an error. I mean, pen and ink you can't fix very well. Paint you can scrape off, you can paint over it. Pen and ink, you either nail it or you don't. And he wouldn't even necessarily remember having done them. His photographic memory would open, literally drive him a little crazy. And to get it out, he had some abuse issues. But that was his exorcism. That was how he got the demons out. That's my experience. Some of you people knew Karl in a different context. I'm just speaking from my own experience, my perception. I may not be perfect on every point, but it's my perception, having known him since the mid-1990s. So anyway, that context, I think, is really critical when you're going to look at his art. As far as his roots, he was raised in Southern California, the La Jolla Del Mar area, right on the beach. Father was of Russian heritage. Mother was Native American, Cherokee, I believe, wasn't it, Kitty? Cherokee. And he really identified a lot with the Cherokee half of him. And it kind of showed in the way he looked. If you look at these self-portraits, he had kind of Native American features, nose, the high cheekbones, not a very large stature, kind of dark skin, wispy beard. I mean, you could see it in him. He had a very rebellious nature, very bright, terrible student. That's not too uncommon. He hated school, although he was extremely smart. Got in some trouble. From what I understand, a judge said, "You're either going in the military or you're going to jail, son." He was 17 years old. Signed up for the Air Force, did a 4-year hitch without incident, remarkably enough. But they found he had a real knack for Morse code. And if you think about the things I mentioned a few minutes ago, it was great memory and remarkable contact, immediate contact between his brain and his hand. It was reflexive. So he was great at Morse code. He did that for 4 years. They left him alone. He stayed out of trouble. Got out of the military, signed up for art school in Denver, and about immediately quit. Again, the academic thing was just not for him. He went back to California, pursued drawing because he was such a great draftsman, and at a very young age started getting major gigs. I mean, he was supporting himself as a freelance graphic artist at a young age. I mean, he was rocking and rolling at the height of that psychedelic period, late 60s, early 70s. I became aware of his art about 25 years before I ever met him. If you remember Psychology Today magazine, still exists. I used to go to a bookstore in New London, Connecticut, and I would always wait for that issue. I'm not even into psychology. The art was mind-blowing. I'd never seen anything like it. We're talking 1970. Fast forward to the mid to late 90s, and I'm introduced to a guy in a little casita here in Grand Junction, and we start talking. It was the guy that did all that art. It was Karl, right here under our noses in Grand Junction many years later. The problem is that technology kind of ruined him, and a lot of other illustrators. As technology advanced in the 80s, and I saw with the company I worked for, we had a graphic art department at a nuclear plant that I worked at. Do any of you remember clip art? Well, that put graphic illustrators out of business because it was cheap. And I know we laid off the graphic artists that were at the nuclear plant where I worked. Well, that was Karl's downfall too. Some of those people were able to transition to fine art and do quite well. Karl didn't have the temperament. He hated decorative art, for one thing. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. And he could be a bit of a curmudgeon, didn't deal well with gallery people, and was very inflexible. So we really had a hard time finding work. Now I've got a story for you. 3 years ago, I was looking through the Daily Sentinel and I saw a headline that just said, "Death Notice." Karl Nicholason, 82, of Grand Junction, died at the Hospice Care Center in Grand Junction, April 29th, 2022. I mean, that was just a gut punch. And I was like, oh my God, Karl just died. And that was it. It was 2 sentences, completely accurate, but very incomplete. He was 82, he lived in Grand Junction, he died in hospice care, period. He was an artist. Well, yeah, he was. He really was. I got a hold of Kitty and wanted to share my condolences and offer help because I knew what the little casita was going to look like. Kitty, out of the kindness of her heart, after they got divorced, let him live in the little 2-room casita attached to the back of their garage. And Karl, not exactly a neat freak. So, a little understated maybe, Kitty. I don't want to be too rude. So I went over to help, opened the door, and it was like a tsunami. If any of you have ever seen photos of the Francis Bacon studio in England, they've actually recreated it in a museum. It looked like Bacon's studio looked like a hazardous waste site. You couldn't see the floor. There were piles of canvases and paper and rags and buckets of brushes. And I mean, it was appalling. That's kind of what the casita looked like, except Francis Bacon didn't live in his studio like Karl did. So I offered to try. I have kind of an analytical brain, and I have to take chaos and make order from it. That was part of what I did as a career. And it's like, well, what do I do with this? I mean, there were just piles of drawings and paintings and these panels, not in date sequence, not done by medium. Karl was very unemotional. When he finished a piece, just throw it in a pile. He got it out of his head. He did what he needed to do. He was done with it. So I spent 5 days. Kitty left the door unlocked for me. I could come and go as I pleased. Spent 5 days trying to figure out what was there and break everything into rough categories. And at the end, after I tabulated, there were about 3,000 pieces. 3,000. Karl owned almost nothing. He had his supplies and his art, pair of jeans, some flip-flops and t-shirts, and that was about it. Drawers that were meant for clothing were just stacked with these large drawings, piles of them. And by the time I was done, I knew that I had to tell a story. I just had to do it. Too many, we all have heard of artists that were remarkably gifted, but antisocial, unrecognized, unknown. They passed away and everything wound up in a dumpster and there's no story. It's like, that can't happen this time. It just can't happen. So 3 years ago, I took on a project to try to do something about that with help from the people that I acknowledged a few minutes ago. I don't want to go on too much, but there are a few things. Karl and Kitty came to Grand Junction from California about 1990. Kitty wound up having a good job here. Karl got a few freelance gigs, but not much. He'd do an occasional book illustration or a poster, or he did do some work, but it wasn't steady. That really led to depression. And I'm guessing that contributed to his beer and tequila consumption. And he was pretty open about that with me when we talked. The first time I met him, I was hooked on his art. And one thing I did learn, I did not ask Karl, oh, well, what does this mean? There were two responses. One was pretty obscene that I'm not going to say in front of a camera. Or he would just shrug and go, I don't know. He'd either get agitated and pissed at you, and he'd think you were a dumbass for asking, or he'd just go, I don't know, it is what it is. It was in my head, now it's not. On to the next vision. That was Karl. And so I learned what buttons to not push. We got along because I recognized his art, and that was a key thing that he needed and didn't get. He knew he was good. Karl, it was not lacking self-esteem. He knew how good he was, and he didn't understand why everybody else didn't know how good he was. Galleries would look at the work and go, yeah, that's really cool, but I can't sell it, so go away. And he would not flex. He wouldn't go, well, what would you like me to paint? What do you think will sell? That wasn't Karl. That wasn't Karl at all. That's why there were 3,000 pieces left, which was kind of interesting. After the 5th day when I came home and mentioned to my wife, Kathy, whom I really need to thank up front, I'm saving that. This is a huge thank you. Because I came home, and our house is already pretty full of art. I came home and said, well, I'm getting Karl's art. And she went, really? Well, how much? And I went, all of it. And there was, what? What? I said, no, you'll learn to like it. It'll be okay. It'll grow on you. So anyway, thank you. Thank you. I'm kind of impulsive when it comes to that stuff. And so we lost a huge room in our house, which is now just Karl Nicholason art storage. So if you take a look at the book, I've tried to make sense out of the whole collection so that when you look at it, you have the context that I talked about earlier. And there is a bit of a sequence. Most of this art starts at what I call the casita years. After 1990, there are a few older pieces. Most of these are from 1990 on when he was living in the casita. He spent a couple of years homeless in Denver. He wanted to try to, make it in Denver, and he was in his mid-60s then. Lived in his truck in the parking lot of a U-Haul center in Denver for 2 years, and looking through his journal, he damn near froze to death. He couldn't find work. There's one page where he's opining that he's in his mid-60s and he has 81 cents to his name. It's like, where'd my life go? What happened to me? He didn't even have money to get back to Grand Junction. And that led to another chapter in the book, which is longing for Southern California. He always wanted to get back to La Jolla Del Mar, to Nicholson, not Nicholason, Nicholson Point Beach, which is referenced in a lot of the work. So that's autobiographical in a sense. So that's kind of the format that the book follows, with enough explanation, hopefully to not bore you to tears, but to give you an idea of what it is you're looking at. So, materials and methods. Karl painted on whatever he had, which often wasn't much. He didn't go out and buy rolls of Belgian linen canvas. I mean, I remember one time he called me. He had a project in mind, and he was broke. And I just gave him some cash so he could buy a roll of canvas, which was unusual for him. He painted on scraps of paper. He painted on cardboard. One piece I treasured almost got thrown away when we were cleaning out the casita. He did a self-portrait in pen and ink on a toilet paper roll. That's what he had. And Diana did a beautiful job presenting that. I mean, I love it. I'd never sell that piece. The guy was down to painting on a toilet paper roll. He usually painted in acrylic. He couldn't afford oil. And the way he treated pieces, oil takes too long to dry, and he didn't have a place to dry the work. You know, he'd take acrylic panels, paint them, throw them in a pile, do another one, throw them in a pile. So acrylic worked for him, and it was cheaper. He did a lot of collage work, really experimental stuff. There are some very, I love this piece just past the post. Mixed media. It's probably acrylic and pen and ink and some kind of wash. He combined all kinds of things. And these were done years ago, so obviously they're archival. They haven't deteriorated. I think if they were going to, they would have by now. They're holding up quite well. Beautiful work. So people will say, well, you know, what medium is that? It's kind of a guess sometimes. What did he paint it on? Well, could be anything. So that's Karl's work. I'll wrap it up with a real quick summary. If you can walk away with a few major points that are in your mind, number one, Karl was, I think, a true outsider, not only in temperament, but he was self-trained, remarkably self-trained. To illustrate at the level that he did with no formal training, not common at all, not common at all. Possibly a savant. I can see that in him with his somewhat psychologically disturbed makeup. The psychoanalyst who looked at the book said almost certainly some level of personality disorder. He created his art to calm what was in his mind. He didn't sit down going, I want to do a nice picture of Mount Garfield or whatever. That wasn't how he worked. It was something that was in his head, and he wanted to get it out of his head, and the art was the result. Left a very significant body of work, which is what we're trying to do, is get the word out. It's posthumous, unfortunately, but better late than never. Too often these kinds of collections, as I said, wind up in a landfill. There are photos in the book of him actually dumping a U-Haul full of paintings in a landfill in California. They'd been in storage, he got frustrated, I guess, drove to a landfill and gone. I mean, what I wouldn't give to have those now. And he just threw them away. And ultimately, he was frustrated by a lack of recognition. He knew he was good. He knew he was good. No lack of confidence. But his personality wasn't geared towards social acceptability or marketing. That stuff, he just couldn't do it, could not do it. So those are some of the key takeaways. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if you have any.
Is that painting in the back there, is that acrylic?
Yes, the Rembrandt portrait, yes. That's Kitty's, she loaned that to us.
Oh, you really laid on the paint there.
Yeah, this is a kind of a little story behind that. He did something similar not long before he did this one, and I wound up selling it for him at a benefit auction at the Arts Center. I was the auctioneer, and he consigned a piece and sold it, much to Kitty's chagrin, as I recall. And to get out of the doghouse, he had to do a better one for Kitty. And he was smart enough to do that. He was smart enough. So yes, yeah, that's an acrylic piece that Kitty loaned.
You mentioned to me that you helped him with a show like over 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And how does that differ from what you got?
Good question. The question was, I did a show for him 30 years ago, in 1999, actually. It was very different. Kathy and I had a gallery up in Uniweep Canyon back in the 90s, and I asked Karl if he wanted a show. He's like, oh, yeah, sure. And I said, you can do whatever you want, because I knew if I tried to pin him down, it would have just been ugly. So he liked the fact that I wasn't telling him the stuff better be marketable. And I wound up, there were a few drawings that did pretty well, but he gave me 20 paintings, little acrylic paintings of Nicholson Point Beach, which he was obsessed with, evening scenes with a gigantic piece of fruit. So try to imagine crashing surf potato or crashing surf broccoli. I mean, yeah, I mean, and I said, okay, Karl, I mean, a deal's a deal. I said, you could show whatever you want. Why this? And he said, it's in my head. I just have to keep painting these till they're not in my head anymore. That's exactly what he said. I'll quit painting fruit on the beach when I quit envisioning fruit on the damn beach. So yeah, it was a real blockbuster. Yes?
I'd like to know which ones were in the psychology magazine.
None of these, unfortunately. The question was, which ones are in Psychology Today magazine? I would love to have those. I do have images in the book. I contacted CRM Books. He did a ton of work for them in the late 60s through the 70s. They were a major publisher of college-level textbooks dealing with psychology, sociology, and public health, on top of Psychology Today magazine. They're now headquartered in New York. I called them, I left messages, I wrote to them saying, where are the originals? And they never responded. They probably don't know. They're probably in a box in a warehouse in Brooklyn or something, you know? I mean, I would love to have those. They're phenomenal, phenomenal. But no, none of these are those. I have tracked down some of the books on eBay. I've bought copies on eBay and have the original texts for some of the work. I'm sorry, somebody? Oh, yes.
Thanks for your work on this. It's marvelous. There was a painting that he did that was a businessman trudging off to work with the booklets in the background. Did you ever come across that?
No, I would remember that.
Yeah.
No, I have not seen that one, unfortunately. Do you know where it came from, or?
I just remember seeing it, Kitty, somewhere. Yeah, so your backwards. Sure. Yeah. Oh, hi. You remember that one? No. We're in the studio. Oh.
Wow.
I'm sure you see.
I would remember that one.
It was that social statement.
Yeah. Well, if it does pop up and it jogs my memory, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, kind of an important point. We were handing out the little tickets, the raffle tickets. This is a cool piece. There were quite a few of these panels, and he usually painted on both sides. Not always, but usually. We picked this one because it's in great condition and it's really cool. So this would be easily $350. Whoever has the winning number gets it, courtesy of me and Orbit. Vanna here.
All right. 154579.
Oh, I think that's mine. All right, Chloe. How cool is that?
So I couldn't remember
Come on up.
how we got it.
Come on down.
That's the
There you go,
winner.
Chloe. Okay, I'll quit talking. Again, I want to thank you all for coming. This is great. Please enjoy the show. Thanks.